Readings in Code Administration, Volume 1, History, Philosophy, Law. Part 1, Why Building Codes? Story 4, The Building Code, by Joseph P. Wolfe, retired building commissioner in Detroit, Michigan. Reprinted from Boca News, March 1958, pages 5 through 6. The introductory paragraph reads, "No matter how good our codes are, they are only as effective as the building official who administers them. Proper use of the building code requires the code administrator to have a comprehensive knowledge of its provisions, but more than that, he must enforce it impartially and use his discretion wisely. Enforcing a building code is a complex task, and the building official should ask others, especially his municipal attorney, for help." Undoubtedly, you have all heard the building code story, a story that has been told many times. Its constant repetition has helped promote our objectives of developing modern building codes and encouraging their universal adoption. However, there is a sequel to the story that is too often overlooked by some building officials, and which raises the question, now that we have this modern building code, what do we do with it? In other words, how do we make the transition from a specification type code to a modern performance version, a version that poses an entirely different set of problems in enforcement? Assuming that the building codes now available for adoption are good ones, let us see what we have to work with. George N. Thompson of the National Bureau of Standards aptly describes a building code as a document embracing a systematic collection of laws, rules, and regulations which, if enforced, provides for safe methods of construction and safe use and maintenance of all buildings and structures. A building code is designed to safeguard life, health, and property of the people. It is intended to keep the people from being hurt physically, financially, or otherwise. Words of admonition to the building official are also implied within the definition. You have been given police powers under these laws. You are responsible for just, equitable, and discretionary enforcement. You have a responsibility to the public. You cannot impose unreasonable or discriminatory regulations. You are dealing with a systematic collection of laws based on proven engineering data, sound reasoning, accepted practice, and scientific tests. Use them. These admonitions concern the administration, enforcement, and use of the building code. Therefore, much depends on the building official himself. The first article or chapter of almost every building code deals with the building official. A committee preparing a new code or revising an old one often gives only scant attention to the administrative requirements. Therefore, the building official usually has greater discretionary powers than can be considered proper for just administration of the building code, unless he fully recognizes his moral and legal responsibilities to the public. Therefore, regardless of the type of code, its effectiveness is only as good as its administration, and the judicious use of a relatively poor building code certainly produces better results than a good code poorly administered. One common enforcement problem is different interpretations of the same code. Where the problem in other years was conflicting codes, now, quite often, it is conflicting interpretations of the same code by different administrators. A discussion of this and other uses of the building code could continue without end. However, there are some important points that should be emphasized here. To make using it easier, a good code should have a complete index, a table of contents, articles or section designations, and appendices incorporating nationally recognized standards. But none of these aids can help if the code is not intelligently used. The proper use of the building code can be compared with using a dictionary, with one exception. A good dictionary has a preface explaining its use. When one uses the dictionary, he should know what he is looking for. Certainly, the same is true of a building code. It is likely that a person who cannot learn the fundamentals of using the building code has never learned how to use a dictionary. A building official, to be competent, must have a comprehensive knowledge of the contents of his code. In order to properly interpret its provisions, he should know something of the reasons for each requirement. He cannot expect to use a building code like a phonograph record. It is not a mechanical device to supplant reasoning and play back answers to the listener. The building official must be capable of using the building code as a tool to do a credible job. One of the most important features of code administration is enforcement. Whenever the word enforcement is used, it is likely to create a different picture for different people. By consulting the dictionary, we learn that enforcement means to put into execution by force, compel obedience to, execute as laws, to enact or obtain authoritatively or by force, to urge forcibly or cogently. The act of enforcing or the state of being enforced, compulsory execution. It should be observed at once that this definition goes beyond the official's administrative authority. It has the connotation of judicial power exercised by courts of equity. Searching further, we find that the word admonish means to reprimand mildly or warn of a fault, to caution, to counsel against an anticipated error, to give solemn instructions, to guide. The real measure of the building official authority lies somewhere between these two definitions, and probably nearer to the latter. Whether we regard enforcement as the role of the judiciary or that of the building official, the latter cannot escape his responsibility to perform his duties impartially and intelligently. He can set the pattern for weak or strong enforcement. He has to decide which laws or ordinances are bad for his community and then institute proper remedial action. He must be able to cope with the pressures which are sometimes brought to bear to procure special favors. He should also be on the alert against discriminatory legislation. These forces are constantly at work, and only a man of high character, integrity, and clarity of thought can combat them, as well as the hue and cry of certain groups who, following any serious accident or catastrophe, shout from the housetops, "There ought to be a law!" It makes little difference to the proponents whether such a law would be good or bad, whether it would allow preferential advantages or create confusion and duplication of jurisdiction. Such experiences occur regularly in all sections of the country, and where reason is supplanted by hysteria, only chaos can result. Guarding against unwarranted pressure legislation tests the building official's ingenuity in appraising it against the orderly enforcement of building code regulations. Legislation at the state level, which encroaches on a local jurisdiction with home rule status, creates confusion and needless duplication of efforts. Here we have one department's jurisdictional authority overlapping that of another, thus creating voids in the chain of enforcement procedures and resulting in one department's failure to carry its enforcement procedures to a point where it is covered by another department. It is evident from this discussion that the building official needs assistance in his duties of administering and enforcing the building code. He not only needs the help and support of his fellow workers and the public, but especially that of his legal counselor. A close working relationship with the city attorney eases the complexity of enforcement for all concerned. Naturally, the legal profession has to know our needs and wants before it can act. This is a sure way of obtaining moral as well as legal support for preventing passage of conflicting laws. One of the best examples of the attorney's insight into enforcement problems is the award-winning article, Elimination of Unsafe Buildings, by Thomas A. Gillum, Assistant City Attorney of Denver, Colorado. The article, which appeared in Municipal Law Review, should be read by all building officials. While Mr. Gillum's article deals with unsafe buildings, he aptly describes the conflict between individual rights and protecting the public. He points out the building official's responsibility to see that the proper laws are enacted, and also that orderly procedures are followed in the performance of his duties. He also points out that the building official is not omnipotent, but always reservedly restricted in his powers. While his police powers may be rather broad, the building official in the administration of these codes is performing a governmental function, a performance of an act on behalf of the sovereign body for the common good of the whole community, with no liability attached to the city for the non-performance or malperformance of his duties. Thus, the building official is better off if he seeks legal advice on what to do, rather than to err and have to suffer the consequences. To add an old cliché, a person forearmed is forewarned. There is also an old saying which might bear repeating here. He who walks a path at night may know the path or carry a light, but one who blindly runs ahead will stump his toe or bump his head. We as building officials would indeed be fortunate to have the support and assistance of an organization such as the National Institute of Municipal Law Officers to guide us along our way. There is a crying need for such help for the building official, and I take this occasion to recommend that we do something about it. Naturally, the building official wants and tries to do a good job, but who is to advise him on administrative matters? Who will be in the vanguard to ferret out and correct confusing legislation? Who will help him in the complex procedural steps toward enforcement? These questions have not been resolved. Like the oft-repeated building code story, only by our constant rehash of the role of the building code administrator and his responsibilities will anything worthwhile be accomplished. A little missionary work here and there cannot but focus attention on the building official and his importance in the community.